ahead and get started. It's 10 minutes early, but why don't we go ahead and get started? That way we can finish early, or if I have to go longer, I go longer without being too late. Okay. Picking up in John chapter 9, verse 8. You recall this is where Jesus passed by and he healed a man that was blind from birth. And as this is significant, it's establishing the fact that Jesus really performed a real miracle. It was indisputable. As a matter of fact, as we looked at the dialogue that goes from the Pharisees, they weren't looking at the fact that he performed a miracle. They were looking at something else, trying to discredit him. So as we look at, having had this man, in verse 6, when he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground, made clay of the spittle, and anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay, and said unto him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is, by interpretation, sent. He went his way, therefore, and washed, and came seeing. Okay. Of course, you can contrast this with so-called faith healing today. Miracles of today. They aren't miracles. It's all. The thing is that the thing here, it would be established that he had been born blind. It was established that he did make him see immediately. Okay. And it was something that was like, some people say, well, I've got something going on internally that you can't see and you can't confirm just by seeing them for the first time. This is something that everybody knew. We see this in verse 8. The neighbors therefore, and they which before had seen him that he was blind, said, Is not this he that sat and begged? So they knew who he was and his condition, that he couldn't see. And you know what? When it says they had seen him that he was blind, it wasn't that they just happened to glance at him. There was something different about him. They inspected. They saw. They analyzed. They said, they saw there was something different. Of course, the fact that he's seeing is radically different. And so with those that understood, this one was that had been blind and that he sat and begged. Verse 9 said, some said, This is he. Others said, No, he is like him. But he said, I am he. He said, I am. I'm the one you're talking that sat there and begged. Therefore said they unto him, How were thine eyes open? How is it that you're seeing now? And this was something that they were interested in. And they were interested in what happened. Okay, he answered and said, A man that is called Jesus made clay, anointed mine eyes, and said unto me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. And I went in and washed, and I received sight. So that he didn't know Jesus as the Messiah. And we'll see this until the latter part of the chapter. He did not know who Jesus was. He said, A man named Jesus made clay, anointed mine eyes. Okay, and he related the events that led to his being able to see. Then said they unto him, Where is he? He said, I know not. So now the concern is, okay, the question is, now that you see, now they want to know where he is. Their interest is peaking now about this Jesus that made him see. They brought, let's see here. He said, I know not. So he didn't know where he was. So they brought to the Pharisees him that aforetime was blind. Why would they do this? They heard the name Jesus. And they saw he did this on, when was this? When this happened? What day was this that it happened? Sabbath day. Now note what they do and what they do not do. They aren't so interested in the miracle that the man sees. The man could now see who couldn't see before, but rather they're interested in the fact that this Jesus, he did this on the Sabbath day. The Pharisees had a very specific law handed down from their fathers. There are specific things you couldn't do. There are specific things you could do. One of the things you could do was apply wine to a person's eyes. But only to the outside of the eyes. You couldn't put the wine on the interior of the eyes, behind the eyelids. And certainly couldn't apply spittle or saliva, because it was thought that saliva had some healing value to it. So by applying saliva to something, like a wound or something, you would be going through a process of healing. Okay, causing to heal. And this to them was servile work. And so they thought, well, you couldn't do anything that would, I don't know, maybe what we think about profitable business. Okay, but here he was applying this, and it was on the Sabbath day, and that's what got them, because he was doing something that was against their traditions. This was not prohibited by the law of Moses, doing these things on the Sabbath day. This was something that they had invented, that trying to define things more minutely than what had already been said. But, this goes to even today, where we know that the restoration plea is that we speak where the Bible speaks, and where the Bible is silent, we remain silent. When things deal with matters of faith that we can prove in the Scriptures, and that things we need to do by command, by approved example, by necessary inference, that's what we bind. We bind where the Bible binds, but we loose where the Bible looses. We don't bind our own opinions upon others. Okay, and where the Bible doesn't bind, we loose. Okay, we can't put it upon ourselves to take the authority to bind things on others that are not bound in the Scriptures, as regards our spiritual life, as regards our religion, our worship of God, and on those things. So, and that's exactly what the Pharisees did. They were binding where the law of Moses didn't bind. So they brought this man to the Pharisees. Perhaps they were concerned that this man Jesus, whom it was well advertised that they wanted him dead, and they saw him doing these things on the Sabbath day as good citizens. They brought this man to the Pharisees. Okay. And it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. And that was the point. John is further describing what was going on and why perhaps they did it. It was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and they opened his eyes. Then again, the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. So this man relating the incident to those that were around him about how he received his sight, they bring him to the Pharisees. The Pharisees ask him again, how did you receive your sight? Okay. He said unto them, he put clay upon my eyes, and I washed, and do see. So that's the second time he's repeated, or the first time he's repeated how he received his sight. Okay, so notice what they're focusing on. How he received his sight on the Sabbath day. Therefore said some of the Pharisees, this man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day. So they're really quickly condemning Jesus because they're doing this thing on the Sabbath day, completely ignoring the fact that the man sees that this wonderful thing is done for him. And they're ignoring some other things that we'll see. I'll state right now, the fact that he was healed, who can do this? Who can heal? We'll talk about that in a moment. So they said he can't be of God because he did this on the Sabbath day. Others said, how can a man that is a sinner do such miracles? These are the people who are thinking. How can a man that is not associated with God, how can a sinner do such miracles? And there was a division among them. So that even the Pharisees were divided. Some were thinking, Nicodemus was one such that saw that Jesus was from God, because how could a man do the things that he did except he come from God? He saw the miracles and he understood no man can do these things except he come from God. So he can't be a sinner. So that was the division. But there were those that immediately accused Jesus of being a sinner because he did this thing on the Sabbath day. Verse 17, they say unto the blind man again, what sayest thou of him that he hath opened thine eyes? The question asked was, well, you see the division that came between the Pharisees. They couldn't decide because they were divided amongst themselves. So they asked him, what do you think about him? You were there. You saw it. Yeah. In a way, it's a matter of speaking. What do you think? He said, he's a prophet. He's not saying he's a sinner. So they're looking for anything that would they could use to charge Jesus as a heretic, one who they could drive out. But he says, I think he's a prophet. I mean, what would you think if What would you think if you had been blind from birth and you could now see? What would your impression be? Oh, he's in cahoots with the devil. He's a Beelzebub, or whatever. Well, you would think.
Reported the devil committing such miracles.
Yeah.
It's reported as healing anyone.
Right. I mean, that's so. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him that they had received his sight. So now it was a question of, okay, let's see how dependable this testimony is. Was he really healed of his seeing, or is he just making up this story? In fact, could it have been where the two of them, he and Jesus, are in cahoots, where they make up this story and they're presenting it just to build up the reputation of Jesus, that he was a prophet. And so they didn't believe that there was a miracle performed until they investigated. Well, in a way, that's valid, In a way, that's valid. So as they call, let me see, verse 19, and they ask them, speaking of his parents, saying, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then doth he now see?" So, what is he your son? His parents answered them and said, "We know that this is our son, and that it was born blind." So he establishes two facts upon here right now. We know yes, he's our son. He was born blind, but by what means he now seeth, we know not. Or who hath opened his eyes, we know not. He is of age, ask him. He shall speak for himself. Now, in a manner of speaking, what we would think in the court of law, which as those Pharisees, they were more or less, they would deal with cases that were lesser than what the Sanhedrin would take. They were like, you might consider it a lesser court. And so as they were investigating this, they would deal with, like I said, they wouldn't deal with major issues like the Sanhedrin did. When they brought Christ before the Sanhedrin, this was a major deal. And they were determining whether or not they could have him condemned to death. But here they're just investigating as a lower court, as a matter. I wouldn't say court, but counsel, I guess you might say. So as their parents were saying, they weren't there. They were not there to witness it firsthand. And so they sort of say, we don't know how it happened. We don't know who did it. Well, notice what verse 22 says about what their motive was. These words spake his parents because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had agreed already that if any man did confess that he was Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. Speaking of that, if Jesus was Christ, not himself Christ, that anyone who would confess that Jesus is Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. And so their fear was that they would be put out of the synagogue if they started giving positive testimony regarding Jesus, because it would hurt their case. So therefore, said his parents, he is of age, ask him. So they're sort of like diverting the attention away from them and putting it back upon their son, who, as they say, is of age. So ask him. He knows, He's of the age of testimony, of responsibility. You can ask him. And you think about when Jesus said in Matthew 10:32-33, "Whosoever therefore will confess it before men, him will I confess before my Father which is in heaven. Whosoever will deny me before men, him will I also deny before my Father which is in heaven." So that they were given an opportunity to confess Jesus, and yet they denied him. This, and I guess one could justify that they weren't actually there and could be as eyewitnesses, so couldn't say. But sometimes we might find ourselves in an opportunity to whether we can either speak up in defense of Christ in some way, defense of good, or not. Sometimes it's safer to remain quiet, right? Or let me illustrate this with a personal experience, and this is not a testimony. This is an example. Several years ago, I worked at Texas Instruments, and they were driving forward a policy of, what do you call it? Tolerance for a specific lifestyle that the Bible condemns. And they had meetings with people to try to prepare them for this, get them geared in the right train of thought regarding this. Now, mind you, I don't think that, considering the dignity, the human dignity, and the fact that God loves all mankind, that anyone should be robbed of a means of employment. I don't think that at all. But I do think that there are things that a company can do that would either discourage that kind of behavior or glorify that kind of behavior. Okay, and this was a case where the company was glorifying that kind of behavior. And so in these meetings, they asked us what we thought. Well, of course, the pressure's there between your big boss, somebody very important in the company, and here you are, the measly workers, and of course, with everybody around, you don't know what they're thinking. And I had the opportunity to speak up and say, this is wrong. Of course, I said a few words, but I wasn't very explicit, because it all came down to the faith, my faith. I had the opportunity, but I didn't take it. And so that's an example I think about on this in confessing Christ, although it was not. What would have made a difference? I don't know. But you know what? Here's the case where I rather than speaking out, I had the opportunity to, and they were asking for thoughts, and I did. Okay, that's just an example. If we talk about these parents, they had an opportunity to speak up, but they didn't, because they feared that they would be put out of the synagogue. I guess that was my fear. I'd put in peril my chances for continuing employment. You get a dark mark on your record, and there it goes. But that was the wrong attitude. That was the wrong attitude. Okay, verse 24. Then again called they the man that was blind, and said unto him, Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. Give God the praise. So now he says, they're calling him again. Okay, this is the third time he's going to be giving testimony about what he did. Now, they use the phrase, give God the praise as it is. We know that this man is a sinner. And that's interesting. We know that this man is a sinner, yet the evidence we'll see will prove differently. But consider, let's look up two verses, please. I had two people to read these two verses. Joshua 7:19 and 1 Samuel 6:5. Could have two people read those, one of each. Joshua 7:19 and 1 Samuel 6:5. I think it was. Okay, does anyone have Joshua 7:19?
And Joshua said unto Achan, My son, give I pray thee, glory to the Lord God of Israel, and make confession unto him, and tell me now what thou hast done, and hide it not from me.
Okay, you recall that this was a point where Achan, it was at Achan. Oh, I'm sorry, it was Achan at Ai. Remember, the Ai, they had a terrible defeat at the hands of those in Ai. And it was because of Achan, who had taken some possessions that he should not have from Jericho. And so the reason why they failed in overcoming those in Ai was because Achan had taken all these taken these possessions, these wealthy things, and buried them in his tent. And so it was as they were interviewing people to find out who did it, Moses said, give God the glory. And he used that phrase, I gathered he meant fess up. Be honest. And that by being honest, you do give God the glory. Okay. Look at also 1 Samuel 6:5.
Therefore you shall make images of your tumors. Wait, 1 Samuel 6:5?
Yes.
Okay. Therefore you shall make images of your tumors and images of your rats that ravage the land, and you shall give glory to God, the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand from your gods and from your land.
Okay. So there the phrase is again, give glory unto the God of Israel. So give God the glory, give God the praise. It's the idea, I gather, from this phraseology that fess up, be honest. Tell us what really happened with your, did you really receive your sight? Give God the glory. Fess up. We know this man is a sinner. You don't have to lie anymore. We know he's a sinner. But he answered and said, whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. One thing I know, that whereas I was blind, now I see. So he's presenting them with the facts. So he's not allowing them to run away with his testimony, to say things he didn't say. Remember when they're confronting Jesus, or when they were trying to get Jesus to say things that he didn't mean. They're trying to get him to put words in his mouth, as it were. In the previous chapters. In chapter 8, verse 53, art thou greater than our father Abraham, which is dead? They're asking Jesus this. And the prophets are dead. Whom makest thou thyself? Well, the fact is, Jesus was not making himself of anything. He was saying, the Father testifies of me. Okay? The Spirit testifies of me. He's got testimony from greater than any of that were there. And, not just mere men witnessing, but rather, and it was not that he was making himself anything. It was that the Father was giving testimony of him. Now we see here that they were asking him, what about this Jesus? And he answered, "No, I have not." Let me see. Whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. So he's addressing the accusation that we know he's a sinner. He says, well, I don't know that. He's not going to deal with that. What he does know is that he was blind and now he sees. It's very interesting that they're not dealing with the miracle directly. Wow, they're dealing with the fact that they're trying to condemn him by accusations that he worked on the Sabbath day, did an unlawful thing on the Sabbath day. And so he says, I don't know if he's a sinner, but I know that I was blind, now I see. Verse 26, then said they unto him again, what did he to thee? How opened thine eyes? How many times did he need to say it? How many times? And so that it comes across in here as he stated. He answered them, I've told you already, and ye did not hear. Wherefore would ye hear it again? Will ye also be his disciples? And that's a jab, that's a cut to the quick, Are you investigating this because you're going to learn more about them because you want to follow after him? And of course, that's the last thing they wanted. You can see the jab he's giving you. You think about this fellow who had been begging by every day of his, for many days, many years of his life, had been born blind, and now, so what kind of influence did he have? Well, what could they do? What could he do? Well, nothing. He had no business. And he was relying upon the goodwill of the people that came by, begging for alms. And now he was right there before the Pharisees, men who were well studied in the law, had very good, what's the word I'm looking for? Good control, of the ability to handle well logic. And in doctrine. Yeah. And there he was, before they're wanting to say, they're wanting to find something that they could accuse Jesus, And so when he wouldn't cooperate, he was dealing with the facts. And so it's, what do you want to know this for? Do you want to be their disciples too? Well, they're just, Urgh. In verse 28, then they reviled him and said, thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. And so you're following after him, but we're not. We're following after Moses. To them, that was the greatest thing, being a disciple of Moses. Well, having studied Moses, they disciplined their lives after Moses, so they thought, and that was like they were establishing themselves very high in principle, in the law. It says, we know that God spake unto Moses. As for this fellow, we know not from whence he is. Well, that's not quite true. They're saying, we know that God spake to Moses. We know where Moses came from. We're his disciples. But this Jesus, where'd he come from? Who is he all about? You know, we're trying to establish where he's about, and we think he's a sinner. As they said, we know he's a sinner. And and the fact is, if you recall the previous dialogue that Jesus had with those men, they knew exactly who Jesus was saying he was and where he came from. They knew. But they're rejecting all of that. Well, the man answered and said unto them, why, herein is a marvelous thing, that ye know not from whence he is, and yet he hath opened mine eyes. I like the way the American Standard reads it. Karen, can you read that verse 30, please?
The man answered and said unto them, why, herein is the marvel, that ye know not whence he is, and yet he opened mine eyes.
Okay. So, herein is the marvel. He said, not a marvelous thing, but here's the marvel. Here's the thing we're wondering about. We see he was healed of his sight. What a marvel. People should marvel and say, wow. But yet, he's saying, here's what the real marvel is. He made me see, and you don't know where he comes from. You men who are so learned with the law, and you're so well, your thought processes are so detailed, and yet you don't know where he comes from, and yet he opened mine eyes? Come on. Even Nicodemus understood that. He said, we know you come from God, because no man could do these things except that he is with God. Now here's also, consider that this man, having been a beggar before, not being able to see, now he's like he's got the argument is going in such a way that he's got control. Okay? Think about why does he have control? Not because he's so brilliant, he's so mentally disciplined. No. It's because he's got the truth. He's got the truth about what the matter. He believes Jesus is a prophet. He sees the effect, he knows that no man can, the miracle that performed in him. How can that be? Well, we can see in Psalm 91, verses 1 and 4 through 7, when you have the truth come from God, you stand well. You can't be defeated. Psalm 91. It's a good thing to give thanks unto the Lord and to sing praises unto thy name. Oh, that's 92. 91. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Look at verse 4. He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler, or armor. Thou shalt be not afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day, nor for the pestilence that walketh in darkness, nor for the destruction that wasteth at noonday. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. So the dangers of being charged when you have the truth of the Lord, you can't be harmed in the way of, why is it that the simplest of men can have a debate, a formal debate among those most powerful professors and doctors of their theological studies, and yet come out ahead? It's because they understand the gospel simply, the simple gospel as they reveal it. You may have heard this. Garland Elkins went to a debate one time with a fellow, and all he did was when it was time, he read Mark 16:16. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned. Very simple. As he used the American Standard Version, he that believeth not shall be condemned. He that disbelieveth shall be condemned. And he got sat down. Well, this other guy got up got through all these various scriptures to try to show that baptism was not essential for one's salvation. And then Garland Elkins got up again. He did the same exact thing. He just quoted Mark 16:16. And he sat down, and this fellow got up again. I don't know how long this went on, but finally he says, I guess he's not going to get off this verse. And when Garland got back up, said, you know what? This verse is still here. I still haven't heard you deal with this verse. I mean, it's simple. He had the truth. Comes from Christ, from the God. And so it was up to this other fellow to disprove this verse. Of course, it's Scripture. It's inspired by the Holy Spirit. And so it is, this man had the truth that Jesus is the Christ, although he hadn't got to that part yet. But he did know he was a prophet because of what happened. So his position was strong because he had the truth. And so as he was making these statements to them, wherein here is the marvelous thing, or the marvel, that ye know not from whence he is, and yet he hath opened mine eyes. Figure it out, guys. Verse 31, now in John 9, verse 31. Now we know that God heareth not sinners. He's making a statement there. So he's actually presenting I forgot the technical term, a logical argument, making two premises and coming to a conclusion as warranted by the evidence. So here he makes the first statement. Now we know that God heareth not sinners. We can look at Job 27:9. We can look at Psalm 66:18. We look at Proverbs 15:29 and Isaiah 1:15. These all proclaim that God is not with those who are sinners, who are involved with iniquity. Okay. Also Psalm 34:15 and 16. And so he makes this statement, but if any man be a worshiper of God and doeth his will, him he heareth. Okay, so these other verses, Old Testament verses, so he's not spouting out stuff that's some people will say, well, he's not inspired. How can he say these things? Well, he's summarizing these points because of what Scripture has taught. Okay, from these Old Testament Scriptures, it's that God doesn't hear the sinners. Okay. Any man be a worshiper of God, he does his will, he heareth. And so often this verse will be used to show that God doesn't hear the prayers of the unsaved, the sinners. And the reasoning they're saying is that because this man is uninspired. And no, we know that when one is diligently searching after, and honestly and genuinely searching for the truth, as Jesus said, if you ask, you shall receive. Knock and it shall be opened. I think that one is sincerely looking for God and the truth, God will provide a way for it. Okay? But as far as hearing his prayer, it is in the sense of one who hasn't learned the whole truth or hasn't obeyed the whole truth has not become his child. Okay? And but he does hear those who have been converted and obey the gospel. Okay, so, but as we see here, he makes a statement, and based on other Scripture, it's a valid argument, 2-point argument. God doesn't hear sinners, but if he worships God and doeth his will, he does hear. Okay, now verse 32, he makes. Okay, that's actually the first point in the premise, first premise. Second premise. Verse 32, since the world began, was it not heard that any man opened the eyes of one that was born blind? Even the prophets from the Old Testament. There's no record of anybody being made to see who was born blind. Premise number 2. Okay, and so you put those two premises together. Verse 33 is the conclusion. If this man were not of God, he could do nothing. First of all, God wouldn't hear his request for healing. Second of all, this man did. He's got to come from God. He just told those Pharisees why they need to believe that Jesus is from God. You know that they must have felt either embarrassed or infuriated because here he is teaching them, And so in verse 34, they answered and said unto him, Thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? And they cast him out. So they cast him out of their presence. it's not indicative that they cast him out of the synagogue or anything like that, but they sure got him out of there. And so you were born in sins. Oh, that goes back to the disciples' question at the very opening. Who did sin that this man was born blind? Of course, Jesus said, nobody. He wasn't born blind because of sin. He was born blind to glorify God. Okay, strangely enough. And he did. And you know what? In the pages of Holy Writ, he glorifies God. For thousands of years, he's been glorifying God in the record that we see here. And so they're saying, well, you were born in sin. They're misunderstanding of and they asked, do you teach us? Well, yeah, he is. They should have heeded. So they cast him out. And as we go on, verse 35, Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, he said unto him, dost thou believe on the Son of God? Now this is something new to him. He hasn't come to understanding who Jesus is other than he was a prophet, but he didn't know that Jesus... Remember, the purpose of John's writing this is to cause us to believe that Jesus is the Christ. In our believing, we have everlasting life. And so as he's talking to this man, just like he was talking to that woman at the well in Samaria, the Samaritan woman, says, dost thou believe on the Son of God? He answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him? Now, his use of the word Lord here is just a courteous address, like we would say, sir, or madam, or something like that. It's just a courteous address. So, sir, who is this, that I might believe on him? And Jesus said unto him, thou hast both seen him, and it is he that talketh with thee. He says, I am the Son of God. And he said, Lord, now it's a different reference now. Lord, this is more of a worshipful, submissive. Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. He understood he's the Son of God. Notice Jesus didn't say, get up, I'm a man. He said, he accepted this worship. Jesus is deity. Jesus is deity, and he accepted this worship from this man who learned about who the Messiah is and who believes on him. Verse 39, and Jesus said, for judgment I am come into the world, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be made blind. I think that's this whole event illustrates exactly what his purpose was, what he did. The blind might see. Who was that? It was this man he made to see. Physically, he made him to see, but now spiritually, he knows who the Messiah is, that he's come. So he sees spiritually, and that's a far greater blessing than just being able to see physically. We all know what a blessing it would be to be able to. When I was 21, there was a new process that was being developed called radial keratotomy. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. It's a way of making radial incisions upon the cornea of the eye to cause the wall of the eye to collapse, correcting. If it's calculated, the depth and the length of the incisions are calculated to cause the cornea to collapse a precise amount to bring the focal point of the eye, of the focusing back to the retina of the eye, thereby correcting or at least improving eyesight. I went through that process. It was experimental at the time. At that time, I could not even read a book without glasses. I mean, I was so not farsighted, close-sighted? Nearsighted, thank you. That I couldn't even read. I could focus clearly about that far, about 2 inches from my face. That's how far I could see, and that's how much correction I need. Well, when I got, after the operation, of course, there were pain, there was healing, all that stuff, but it was done for many, these are rather recent, I guess you might say, but from that, after healing, after a few weeks, not both eyes were done at the same time, you did one eye, then the other. So, but after both eyes were done and being able to see clearly, being both to read and to see far away clearly, what a marvelous gift it was. I could see, it was great, wonderful. And it wasn't until about 2000 that my eyesight began to change. Could have been because I was getting older, could have been because I was staring at computer screens all the time. Whatever it was, my eyesight began to change. But for those years that I could see so clearly, what a gift it was. Even now, my eyesight is far better than when before the operation. And I'm telling you this because of I have a personal experience with the gift of sight. Okay, and when I say personal experience, I know what it means. And for this fellow, having been blind all his life and to be able to see, imagine the marvel. But then the gift of the knowledge of Jesus Christ, that he's the Son of God. What a gift. So the blind was made to see. But yet, what about those that could see? Who are they? Well, you had the Pharisees who had studied the law deeply, and they should have been able to see. They had a lot of understanding, but they couldn't see. And so what I should say is they could see, but they were made blind. They had this stumbling block called Jesus. They couldn't believe that he was the Messiah. And so the blind, or those who could see, they which might, they which see not might see, and they which see might be made blind. Well, now, and some of the Pharisees which were with him heard these words and said to him, "Are we blind also?" That's almost like a, well, duh. You know what I mean? It's like, well, are you blind? I mean, they're rejecting Jesus as the Son of God and say, are we blind? Well, they've been trying their diligently. Every turn they go, it's like, we know he's a sinner. He must be wrong. Everything they do, they're trying to degrade him, disgrace him, defame him, to make accusation against him. And yet, are we blind also? Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you should have no sin. But now you say, we see, therefore your sin remaineth. They could see, and they say that because they say they see, their sin remains. Because they reject Jesus, they're not going to find everlasting life. They're not going to find forgiveness because they are rejecting Jesus as the Messiah. Rejecting, it won't go to him. In Matthew 23, that's Jesus accused those scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. They would go miles and miles and make converts to Judaism. But after that, they'd make him twofold a child of the devil. Okay. And so all the effort they put into saving souls to help them to bring to understanding of God, and yet it was all for naught because they ended up, because of their teachings, that ones they converted became as much a child of the devil as they themselves had. So their sin remains. And so that's as it is as one who would say that he understands, but he has no sins. His sin remains. Okay. We'll stop at this point. It's a good stopping point. Continue on to chapter 10 next week. Are there any thoughts about what we discussed today, or questions?
Yeah, on Isaiah chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. He said, go, this is Isaiah's commission, and he said, go and tell these people, hear ye indeed, but understand not, and see ye indeed, but perceive not. Make the heart of this people fat, and their eyes make their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and convert and be healed.
Yeah.
Yes,
Some things never change.
yeah, but they're still doing it.
Yeah.
They just haven't changed.
Yeah. Have you ever spoken with somebody about the Bible study or anything like that, and you're going over things that to us it's evident, it's as plain as day what it means, but to some people who are not used to thinking in those ways, it's like, it just goes over their head. They don't understand what the point you're trying to make, and yet when you explain it to them, they say, well, yeah, or if they say, yeah, I can see it, but then they don't do anything about it. Say, oh. You just want to shake them, wake up. Well, it's like they won't see it. Some people are so stuck in their ways, biased in their denomination, that what you show them just doesn't register, or if it does, they feel offended. Okay. And so as Isaiah going to his own people, and they were it was making that they wouldn't hear the truth. Okay. Okay. Such as
They were afraid of fear. They were afraid of their power being taken away over the Jews.
Okay. Could be. They did have a lot of influence, and they liked being in that control, I suppose, from what the evidence that I see. They like that power.
Power corrupts.
Mm-hmm.
An absolute power.
Power corrupts, absolutely. So, thank you for your attention, your questions.